In a small, forgotten village, located deep in the shady forests, there was an ancient mansion known as Blackwood Manor. The villagers whispered about its dark history, tales of madness and murder that had been the curse of this house for centuries. One stormy night, a tired traveler named Elias sought refuge in a dilapidated estate, unaware of the horrors that awaited him inside. Elias stepped inside, and the heavy door creaked ominously and closed behind him. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the only source of light was the flickering candles placed along the large corridor. As he moved on, he noticed a portrait of a stern woman hanging on the wall. Her eyes seemed to be following him, and a shiver ran down his spine. Elias continued walking down the hallway, his footsteps echoing in the empty mansion. He felt a chill in the air, as if the walls themselves were alive and watching him. Suddenly, he heard a faint whisper, barely audible, calling his name. With his heart pounding, he followed the sound and found himself in a dusty library filled with ancient books. In the center of the room, an antique, ornate mirror caught his attention. As he approached, the whispers grew louder and more insistent. He looked into the mirror, and to his horror, saw that the reflection in it was not his own. Instead, it was the stern woman in the portrait, her eyes full of malice. Elias recoiled from the mirror, his breathing becoming ragged. The whispers grew louder, turning into a cacophony of voices, pleading, mocking, and threatening. He ran out of the library, desperately trying to escape from the haunting images and voices. As he ran through the dark corridors, he noticed that the portraits on the walls had changed. Faces of the villagers stared at him with eyes wide with horror. Desperately trying to find a way out, Elias found himself in a large dining room. A long table was set for a feast, although everything was covered with dust. In the dim candlelight, he saw a figure sitting at the head of the table. He was a man with a haggard face and empty eyes that stared blankly straight ahead. As Elias approached, the figure slowly turned to face him, revealing a skeletal grin. Elias felt his blood freeze in his veins. His breathing quickened, and he staggered back, stumbling and falling to the floor. The figure sitting at the head of the table began to rise slowly, her movements awkward and convulsive, like a puppet on strings. The whispers that filled the library were now everywhere, voices intertwining into an ominous symphony that was maddening. They called him, begged him to stay, and among them was one particularly loud voice, the voice of the woman in the portrait. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice whispered, and it seemed to come from every corner of the room. Elias got to his feet and, trembling, began to back away from the dining room. But every step he took only led him deeper into the maze of corridors and rooms. He couldn't find a way out, and a feeling of hopelessness gripped him. Passing through a long, dimly lit corridor, he suddenly found himself in front of a door that was ajar. A warm light was coming from behind it, and he could hear the faint sounds of music. With the last of his strength, he pushed open the door and entered the room. Black smoke enveloped Elias, shackling his body with icy cold. He tried to scream, but the smoke got into his mouth, making it impossible for him to make sounds. His heart was beating in his chest like a hunted animal, and he could feel fear taking over every muscle. The woman in the portrait, as if enjoying his agony, slowly approached, her grin growing wider and sinister. The shadows on the walls began to move faster, and their whispers turned into a deafening chorus of voices shouting in unison. They taunted, threatened, and pleaded, creating a cacophony that tore Elias's mind apart. At that moment, images from his past surfaced in his mind. Childhood, family, friends. Everything that once mattered has become a distant and unattainable reality. His world was shrinking, becoming more and more gloomy and hopeless. The shadows on the walls began to take the form of people. These were the villagers who had previously looked at him with horror. Now their faces were distorted with pain and hatred. Their eyes burned like the fires of hell, and they slowly moved towards Elias, surrounding him from all sides. Felt invisible hands grab his shoulders, legs, and arms, holding him firmly in place. The coldness of those touches penetrated deep into his bones, causing his body to shake with unbearable pain. The woman in the portrait stopped in front of him, her face now so close that he could see every little detail of her soulless eyes. "Did you come here to set us free?" she whispered, and her voice penetrated his mind like a poisonous fog. "Now you're going to be one of us." Elias tried to pull away, but his strength left him. The shadows wrapped around him tighter and tighter, plunging him into an endless nightmare. His vision began to fade, and he saw the faces of the people around him distorted into horrifying grimaces. The last thing he heard before he plunged into darkness was her evil laughter filling the entire space around him. The next day, the villagers discovered that Blackwood Manor was empty again. There was no sign of Elias inside, no sign of his presence. Only in the library, on an old table, there was a book with his name on the cover. Over time, the story of the traveler who disappeared into the cursed mansion became a new legend, which mothers used to scare their children, warning them against going to the old house. Blackwood Manor remained just as sinister and mysterious, attracting those who were reckless enough to explore its dark secret.